Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. With most of us spending multiple hours each day online, it's safe to say the internet knows a lot about us. Unfortunately these days, there are plenty of people out there trying to get their hands on that data of yours. NordVPN's double data encryption helps you stay hidden online and gives you increased digital anonymity. If you've never used a VPN before because you're worried it all sounds too technical, worry no more. NordVPN is extremely easy to use. You can connect with just a single click, and hey presto, you're connected. Keep your personal information safe with NordVPN on up to 6 devices per account. Even better, their VPN is super fast and reliable, with over 5,400 servers across 59 countries. That not only means you can connect to a server near you for increased speed, you can also connect to servers in far-off countries. Why might you do that? Well, when you log into a streaming service in your home country, many of your favourite shows and movies are region-locked. With NordVPN, you can access the content that isn't available where you live. Right now, I'm living in Japan, but I can just open up the NordVPN map, click on the UK, and after just a few seconds, I can log into any of my streaming services and watch some classic sitcoms from back home. Right now they have a special deal on for all of my viewers. Head over to nordvpn.com/masquerade or use promo code MASQUERADE and you'll get 73% off their 2-year plan, plus 4 months for free. At only the price of a coffee per month, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you've really got nothing to lose. Find that unique URL in the description or comment section, and enjoy all the protections and conveniences of NordVPN. This is 21-year-old University of Virginia student Otto Warmbier. In early 2016, Otto was scheduled to visit Hong Kong as a part of a UVA study abroad program, but Otto had his heart set on visiting a very different Asian country whilst en route. He contacted Young Pioneer Tours, a Chinese-based adventure tour company, who promised destinations your mother would rather you stayed away from. Such places included the irradiated ruins of Pripyat, the wild, rocky frontiers of Afghanistan, and also Otto's desired travel destination, the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea. Otto arrived in North Korea's capital, Pyongyang, on the 29th of December 2015. His tour group included 10 other American citizens, as well as a Liverpudlian named Danny Grattan. Danny remembers that the tour group were a like-minded band of mostly young people, and despite the risky location, there was an overwhelming atmosphere of fun and excitement. Naturally, all tour groups that enter Pyongyang are strictly controlled by the North Korean government, but during the New Year tours, the Kim regime tries to show its guests that it parties just as heartily as the next country, and plies the tourists with vast amounts of booze. Danny Grattan remembers the group drank very heavily in Pyongyang's one and only hotel for foreign guests. However, there is one floor of the Yanggakdo International Hotel that is forbidden to foreigners. The so-called secret 5th floor that houses the hotel's staff. The 5th floor is devoid of any kind of luxury, with bare floors and grey-painted walls. The only colour comes from propaganda posters that line the walls. Foreign knowledge of the floor's existence has given rise to a kind of 5th floor challenge, daring tourists to venture into the forbidden hallways, sometimes just to peek, sometimes to take a few pictures. Those who are caught usually just receive a warning or have their cell phones seized. But at exactly 1:57 AM on New Year's Day, a man, purported to be Otto Warmbier, was caught on camera entering the forbidden floor. This figure supposedly tried to steal one of the propaganda posters, then left empty-handed. Just over 24 hours later, Otto and the rest of the tour group were sitting in the departure lounge of Pyongyang Airport, awaiting their flight back to Beijing. Danny Grattan remembers swapping contact details with Otto, only to see a gang of North Korean officials approaching with a look of urgency about them. "Otto Frederick Warmbier," one of them said. "Please come with us." "Well, that's the last time we'll ever see you again," Danny half-joked. But Otto didn't look scared at all. In fact, he gave a kind of half-smile as he was led away. The group briefly awaited his return, but when their plane was ordered to take off without him, they began to fear the worst. Although North Korea admitted to detaining Otto, it took them 6 weeks to announce their reasons for doing so, that reason being subversion. According to the group that Otto was with, he wasn't even in the hotel that night, and the person in the CCTV footage didn't even resemble him. Still, the North Koreans went ahead with the trial. The picture you're looking at is of Otto's first public appearance since his arrest, one in which he begged Kim Jong-un's forgiveness. It was a complete show trial. Otto gave a coached confession, admitting to trying to take the poster, pretty much just reading from a script. If he played along, he was told, he'd be let go with a warning. At this point though, it does appear that he broke character, genuinely pleading for his life. It was widely believed that the US State Department would secure Otto's release before sentencing. However, the North Koreans shocked the world by condemning him to 15 years hard labour. The US continued to demand Otto's release, and after a while, the North Koreans eventually gave in when things started getting heated. However, when Otto was delivered back to America, he was severely brain damaged and in a vegetative state. Everyone was horrified. The North Koreans claimed that Otto had fallen into a coma after contracting botulism shortly after his trial, possibly as a result of eating rotten food. This is doubtful. As one doctor put it, for somebody who had supposedly been bedridden for more than a year, his body was in excellent condition. In Otto's case, there are definitely things the North Koreans aren't telling us. Having lost all hope, Cynthia and Fred Warmbier requested that Otto's feeding tube be removed. He passed away on the 19th of June, 2017. His story constitutes a terrifying cautionary tale that speaks to the mercilessness and brutality of the Kim regime. Looking at this photo of Otto begging for mercy, knowing he wasn't going to get any, it's truly haunting stuff.
This is Bart Whitaker, accompanied by his mother Patricia and his brother Kevin on the left. Bart had something of a troubled youth and was forced to drop out of high school after several incidents of criminality led to a psychiatrist diagnosing him with clinical symptoms of paranoid delusional disorder. Bart's parents simply threw money at the problem, hoping their affluence would plug the hole in their son's mental health. They bought him several luxury cars and a lakeside townhouse in Willis, Texas, paid for his tuition at Sam Houston State University, and even bought him a $4,000 Rolex, which was given to him as a graduation present. But Bart's graduation was nothing but a ruse. In fact, he had dropped out of university several months prior. He only told them he'd graduated as a way to gather his family in one place. You see, Bart had a plan, and it was one that would irreparably change his life for the worse. After the celebratory dinner, the Whitakers drove back home, with 19-year-old Kevin being the first to enter the house. He was greeted by the sight of a masked man, and at first, he simply smiled, believed it to be part of a prank organized by his brother. But it was no prank. The masked man raised a handgun and shot Kevin in the chest. The gunman then turned the weapon on Patricia, putting a bullet in her before she collapsed to the floor. Kevin died within minutes of being hit, with Patricia passing away shortly after being airlifted to a hospital. Bart's father, Kent, attempted to rush the shooter, but was incapacitated after being shot in the shoulder. It was then Bart's turn to attempt to subdue the gunman. He was shot in the arm for his troubles. But this final wound was pre-planned, a way for Bart to divert suspicion away from himself, away from the fact that it was him that had paid the gunman to take out his family. It turned out that Bart had wanted his family out of the picture so he could collect on $1 million life insurance payout. He was sentenced to death by a Texan jury, but was later given clemency by the governor of Texas after a lengthy campaign for mercy led by his father, Kent. If only Bart had showed his mother and brother the same kind of mercy. His parents gave him everything he could ever want, and in return, he took the most precious thing of all from them, their very lives.
This is a picture of Santa Claus. Okay, it's not Santa. Santa may or may not be real, but Bruce MacArthur's real, and by the end of this segment, I can guarantee you'll wish he wasn't. 68-year-old Bruce MacArthur made most of his money as a landscaper, but come Christmas time, he'd don the inimitable red suit and take on the role of every child's favourite festive icon, Santa Claus. He'd set up ship in Toronto's Agincourt shopping mall, sitting hundreds of giddy kiddos on his knee while asking them what their dream Christmas gift might be. According to visiting parents, Bruce was a natural, and their kids adored him. Yet little did they know that Bruce was a monster, one capable of the most profane acts imaginable. And even worse, his landscaping business was little more than a front to cover up his crimes. Because, in reality, he wasn't transforming his adoring clients' gardens into visions of paradise. He was turning them into cemeteries. Bruce is what we might call a... meaning he was attracted to the remains of the recently and not so recently deceased. And in order to explore his morbid fascination, he targeted the poor, the vulnerable, and the lonely. Most of Bruce's victims were recent immigrants to Canada, such as Salim Essen or Sarouche Mahmoudi. Others were lovelorn, older men, such as Andrew Kinsman or Dean Lissowick. But all of them became a part of Bruce's sick fantasy once he dispatched of them. His usual method was strangulation, and once his victims had been snuffed out, he'd go about posing and photographing them, some in sickly comic poses, others in more carnal positions. One victim was posed wearing a fur coat with a cigar in his mouth. Others had their beards or heads shaved. Those who were less fortunate were subjected to even more hideous acts. When Bruce became bored with his victims, he'd dismember them, then dispose of their remains under the flower beds of his landscaping clients who often complimented Bruce on his green thumbs, unaware that their cosmos and daylilies were feeding on the bodies of his victims. Following an intensive police surveillance operation, Toronto authorities raided MacArthur's 19th floor apartment in the Leaside district, only to make a horrifying discovery. They found a young man wearing absolutely no clothes, handcuffed to the bed, with a black bag secured over his head. He was terrified and begged the detectives to free him. They did, and promptly took Bruce into custody. At his trial, Bruce pled guilty, but showed no remorse for any of his actions. A judge handed him several life sentences, with a non-parole period of 25 years, meaning he'll likely die in prison, never to wear a Santa outfit ever again.
This is the List family of Westfield, New Jersey. On the far left is 46-year-old John, flanked by his wife and his youngest son, Frederick. The two older children are Patricia, 16, and John Jr., 15. John Sr. was a World War II veteran who had taken a job as a vice president of a bank in Jersey City. It was a well-paying job, and as a result, his wife was content. He took care of his mother in their large suburban home, and his children excelled in their school studies. But something was brewing beneath the surface, something invisible, an evil that pushed John to do something unforgivable. On the afternoon of November 9th, 1971, while his children were still at school, John List retrieved 2 loaded handguns from his study and executed both his wife and mother. When Patricia and Frederick arrived home from school, John ambushed them. He eliminated both, made himself a late lunch, then drove to his bank to close the family's bank accounts. Next stop was John Jr.'s high school. He promised his eldest son that he'd watch him play in an inter-school soccer game. The occasion meant a lot to the young midfielder, and his father's appearance spurred him in a game that saw his own Westfield High School beat the opposing team by several goals. On the drive home, John List congratulated his son, promising him a reward for his fine performance. But that reward would be nothing but a bullet. Ballistic evidence showed that John Jr. had struggled with his father, trying to prevent his execution. Needless to say, he failed. After that, John simply disappeared. John List left behind a 5-page letter on his desk in his office. Addressed to his local pastor, John had written that he saw far too much evil in the world, and they had taken the lives of his own family in order to save their souls. Amazingly, he successfully evaded capture for 18 years until the crime was featured on Fox's America's Most Wanted in May of 1989. The List family segment featured an age-progressed clay bust sculpted by forensic artist Frank Bender, and incredibly, John was arrested just 2 weeks later in Virginia. He bore a striking resemblance to the often mocked clay bust. Less than a year later, John was convicted of 5 counts of first degree and handed a sentence of 5 consecutive life terms. I feel that, because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened, John said before being taken to prison. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer. On March the 21st, 2008, John passed away from pneumonia at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. He was 82 and died hoping that he would finally be reunited with his family in heaven.
This is Dale Cregan. By the time he was just 22, Cregan had amassed a sizable firearms collection and was making £22,000 a week selling illicit substances under the guise of owning a plastering business. But those close to him knew the truth. Dale was a dangerous man who, after having his eye carved out during a brawl in Thailand, chose to wear a black prosthetic as a way of intimidating his enemies. Cregan was also quick to pull the trigger, a policy that led to the murders of rival father and son gangsters David and Mark Short. Following those slayings, Cregan went on the run, sparking a nationwide manhunt that would only end when he handed himself over to the British authorities. But before he surrendered, Cregan would kill again, horrifying an entire nation and sparking a period of national mourning. At 10:30 a.m. on the 18th of September 2012, police constables Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone responded to a call in the small village of Mottram, just 12 miles east of Manchester's city centre. This followed a call from someone complaining that a man had thrown a concrete slab through the rear window of his 30 Abbey Gardens property. The caller said that the man responsible was still in the vicinity. The dispatcher assured him that officers would be there shortly. "I'll be waiting," the caller replied, before calmly hanging up. Having failed to spot any potential offenders fitting the caller's description, PCs Hughes and Bone drove into the small cul-de-sac of Abbey Gardens, hoping to question the homeowner. Yet, as they entered the small, overgrown garden at the front of the house, the door swung open, and a man appeared. It was Dale Cregan, with a pistol in one hand and a grenade in the other. There were never any broken windows or fleeing perpetrators. It was Dale himself that had called the police, and in doing so, he had led Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone right into a trap. Cregan began firing wildly at both constables as they approached. They were both protected by their body armor and made a tactical retreat, Bone rushing into cover, Hughes running back up the path. Being the only one in his sights, Cregan began unloading round after round into Hughes' back, with one bullet catching her just below the body armor, ripping right through her spine. In an instant, she was paralyzed, falling forward onto the concrete, where she was shot 3 more times. Cregan then rounded the corner and fired 23 bullets into PC Bone's direction. She tried and failed to deploy her taser, and was shot between 5 and 8 times, the fatal bullet striking where the body armor was weakest. Bone was dead, and Hughes was lying half paralyzed on the garden path. But Cregan wasn't done. Before he fled the scene, Cregan pulled the pin on the hand grenade and tossed it into the front garden. It's likely the last thing Nicola Hughes ever saw was the sight of a live grenade fizzling on the grass next to her before everything went black. Cregan gave himself over to the police the following day, stating that, "I just done 2 coppers. You were hounding my family, so I took it out on yours." In February 2013, he pled guilty to 4 counts of murder. He's one of the few British prisoners subjected to the so-called whole life order, a statute which assures he will die in prison. At their funerals, Constables Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes were described as brave and courageous. Their chief constable added that they both exemplified the very best of British policing. Their slayings are a reminder that there is a very real and very tangible evil that exists in this world. One that can possess a man to fill his empty eye socket with a polished onyx, kill a rival's only son, then take the lives of 2 innocent police officers in one final act of despicable, unforgivable rage.
This exemplar of counterculture is Sean Flynn, and his friend on the right is named Tim Page. The only son of swashbuckling actor Errol Flynn, Sean briefly followed his father into acting before giving up the trappings of Hollywood for that of a combat photojournalist during Vietnam. Flynn was an altogether different kind of reporter, more akin to Ernest Hemingway than Walter Cronkite. He would regularly join U.S. Special Forces patrols and was present during Viet Cong ambushes. This direct approach not only resulted in Sean being wounded in combat, but he also engaged in direct combat with the Viet Cong, at one point picking up the weapon of a fallen soldier before using it to defend himself. Then, in early 1970, news broke that the North Vietnamese army had advanced into the neighboring country of Cambodia. Flynn and Page rushed to cover the story, driving their motorcycles out to the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh. However, in April of that same year, Flynn and Page departed Phnom Penh, traveling back towards the Vietnamese border to attend a Saigon press conference. It's believed they came across a group of Viet Cong guerrillas who had set up an ad hoc checkpoint on Cambodia's Highway 1. Eager to interview them to get an alternative perspective on the war, Flynn and Page climbed off their bikes and followed the guerrillas into a nearby tree line. Neither were ever seen again, and the photograph you're looking at is the last ever taken of Sean Flynn and Tim Page alive. Even today, Flynn and Page's fate remains a mystery, but a steady drip of information from the Vietnamese government has allowed us to paint a picture of what happened following their capture. Although they were taken alive by the Viet Cong, it's thought that Flynn and Page were soon sold on to a different group, one which made the North Vietnamese seem relatively cuddly by comparison: the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge twisted the leftist political ideas of their neighbors until they were barely recognizable. They preached the idea of returning to Year Zero, from which humanity might begin anew. They also loathed intellectuals, meaning anyone who so much as wore glasses or owned science books would be condemned to death. If Flynn and Page did indeed end up in their hands, I think we can safely assume the worst. Sean's mother, French actress Lily Demita, spent vast sums of money searching for her son, but had no success. In 1984, she gave up hope of finding him and had her son declared legally dead. But for our own sanity, it's better not to speculate on the kind of suffering he endured before his rich and storied life was finally snuffed out forever.
This is La Dama del Silencio, the Dame of Silence, more commonly known as Juana Barraza. Juana had a terrible childhood. She was reportedly sold to an abusive stepfather for just 3 beers by her mother. As a result, she took solace in her one and only passion, lucha libre, a form of masked professional wrestling in Latin America. But her comical appearance belies her true capacity for violence, and soon the respect and admiration her fans felt for her mutated into fear and loathing. Between the late 90s and the year 2006, Mexico City was in the grip of a serial killer known only as La Mata Viejitas, the killer of old ladies. La Mata Viejitas was thought to have murdered up to 50 women and was suspected to be a much younger man who, at one point, was believed to have taken his own life to avoid capture. However, the Mexican public was stunned to learn that none other than La Dama del Silencio had been responsible for the murders, and that her nom de lucha was a direct reference to her murderous hobby. To this day, Juana's reasons for killing haven't been entirely explained, but authorities have speculated that she associated her victims with her mother, believing that she was helping society by killing them. Juana was a person whose childhood trauma had projected itself well into adulthood, proving that the things we suffer during our youth have the capacity to echo throughout the remainder of our lives. sometimes with horrifying results.
Let's take a step back in time for the next one and examine a mystery from history. And believe me when I say that this case is wild. Back in 1979, a headless mummified torso was found in a cave in Idaho, far off the beaten track. And by torso, I mean just that. No legs, no arms, nothing else. The remains had been wrapped in a burlap sack and shallowly buried. They were discovered by a family searching for arrowheads. I'm sure you can imagine their reaction. 12 years later in 1991, an arm, 2 legs, and a mummified hand were also located in the same cave system. This mysterious body was literally being reconstructed piece by piece. Though no head was ever found, forensic artists were still able to determine a few things about the relatively well-preserved man. They knew that in life he must have had reddish-brown hair, and that he was around 40 years old when he perished, that he was of European descent, and that his chopped-up remains had been left to mummify in the cave for 10 years or more. They dubbed him Buffalo Cave John Doe. Using the John Doe's DNA, forensic specialists built a genealogical tree and were able to narrow down the number of possible IDs. Whoever Buffalo John was, he was descended from pioneers, and his grandfather was likely a polygamist since an unusually large number of relatives were matched to him. We're talking hundreds of cousins and extended relatives. One by one, they crossed off possible candidates for the Buffalo John, and eventually made an interesting discovery. A bootlegger and outlaw named Joseph Henry Lovelace, born 1870, matched with the DNA profile of our John. In 1916, Lovelace was sent to prison after being found guilty of slaying his second wife, Agnes. At Agnes's funeral, Lovelace John remarked that his papa wouldn't be behind bars for long. He never was. That's not because he got a lenient sentence, however. Lovelace was an expert at escaping prison. He'd done so numerous times in the past, sawing through bars, somehow managing to stop a moving train. Some real Red Dead action. After his escape, this composite was drawn up by the local county sheriff's department. This image was used for his wanted poster, which was also detailing the clothes he was wearing at the time of his escape. His mummified remains were found wearing the same clothes as described on the poster, leading investigators to conclude that he died very shortly after his breakout in 1916. Though this coldest of cases has finally started to thaw, half of the mystery is still far from solved. Lovelace might have his name back, but identifying the victim is only the first step in a case like this. The next step is figuring out who chopped him up and why. His wife's brothers or father? A fellow outlaw he'd crossed one too many times? It's intriguing to think about, but whatever the motive of whoever was responsible, a guy like Lovelace probably had it coming.
Depicted here, enjoying their Christmas dinner, are Ian Johnston and his wife, Sadie Hartley. The woman in the background is named Sarah Williams. Ian and Sarah met during a visit to a Manchester dry slope skiing centre, where the ex-firefighter impressed the younger Sarah by showing off his skills in the notoriously tough discipline of telemark skiing. What followed was a brief but intense affair, one that Ian was forced to end because of Sarah's possessive and difficult tendencies. Yet for some reason, Sadie Hartley and Sarah Williams somehow met following the end of the affair, a deadly mistake that would yield fatal consequences for Sadie, the 61-year-old mother. Sarah plotted an elaborate scheme to win Ian back, mailing vile letters to his wife and begging him to come back to her. When that failed, she decided to take more drastic action, travelling all the way to Germany to purchase a stun gun before visiting Sadie at her home in Helmshire, Lancashire, UK. After incapacitating Sadie, Sarah Williams stabbed her love rival over 40 times with a 7-inch butcher's blade. She believed she had plotted the perfect crime, but after both the letter and the blade were found, Sarah Williams was arrested in a dawn raid and taken into custody. In August of 2016, she was sentenced to serve 30 years to life and is unlikely to be paroled until the year 2046.
Take a look at this particular picture of a happy couple on their wedding day. At first, there seems nothing amiss about it, but the more astute among you might notice that the man's face is strangely familiar, and you'd be right, because the woman in the picture is Rosalie Willis, and her new husband is none other than infamous cult leader Charles Manson. Manson would go on to form the murderous cult known simply as the Family. He also devised an insane ideology that he named Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles song of the same name. The ideology detailed a coming war from which the family would emerge as the dominant force. His reign of terror culminated in the infamous Tate LaBianca slayings, and although Manson didn't personally participate, the prosecution argued that his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. But what's terrifying about this particular photograph is just how normal he looks. How even the most benign-looking people are capable of perverse acts of pure evil. Monsters who wear masks of men in order to walk among us.
Lots of thank yous to do today. Firstly, a big thank you to Letsread for lending his voice to half of these backstories, and secondly, a big thank you to Sam Riding for writing the script. Links to Letsread's channel and Sam Riding's email and Instagram can be found down below. And finally, a huge shout out to all my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Alex Greensall, Alunír, Azrael Warakai, Charlie Lackey, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. McDonald, Expand Dong, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, Infamous-senpapi, Joshua Perez, Leonardo Martinez, Lord 210, Lucas Maniac, Mackenzie Griffin, Myra Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Native Beauty, Peter Logjaraj, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Ronnie Franklin, Sarah Ramirez, Sean M. Brenner, Silas Geist, Sloane Crawford, Taylor&Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Ms. Crypto, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, Tom Brady is Based, Jeff the Killer, Amanda Hansen, Boise McSnatchy, Lydia Glassley, Yoshi6500, Hamish K, and Phantom Knight. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. Remember to smash that like button or I'll smash you, and you'll be hearing from me again very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.